Nation in Conversation is proudly brought to you by AFGRI, NJ, Grain SA, John Deere, Monsanto, Nedbank and Senwes.
Well, a very good morning to our Nation in Conversation, and my name is Jeremy Maggs. I'm a television and radio news presenter, and today the issue under discussion is the image of agriculture in South Africa. Many people would say it has problems in that respect. It is regarded in a very negative light. We are hoping today to cast some new thinking in that particular respect. The debate itself is divided into two distinct parts. Part one, for about 20-25 minutes, is going to have a look specifically at what the agriculture industry itself thinks of its own brand image. And I'm hoping that the guests that I will introduce you to in a moment are going to be honest, open and forthright as far as that is concerned. I will do my very best to challenge them. After that, we'll take a short break. Then I will introduce three leading brand experts in South Africa who I'm told on the drive down to this Harvest Day have done a little bit of research in the car. But jokes aside, they know exactly what they're talking about. And they'll be able to give some real insight, not only into what they think the brand of agriculture stands for in South Africa at the moment, but perhaps some useful guides, some pointers as to where this particular discipline might go. I always say that being a broadcaster, the one thing that you can count on, as far as I'm concerned, is that I absolutely love the sound of my own voice. And audience hush, okay? But aside from that, none of this is going to work unless the audience itself participates as well. So let me say a very warm welcome to all of you. It's good to be with you. And at some point in the conversation, there we go, up go the lights. I will ask you to engage as well, and I would ask you to be as hard on the three guys sitting here as the people that we're going to talk to a little bit later on. So to my far left, Omri van Zyl, very warm welcome to you. You and I have met before from Agri SA. Chris Venter from AFGRI, good morning to you, and a very warm welcome. And Francois Strydom from Senwes, a very warm welcome to you as well. Let me start off with the one key question that I think is the most important thing. How on earth does this small town, Omri, fill its airport with 132 aeroplanes? I was absolutely bowled over when I found that. Did you fly in?
Yes, no, I didn't fly.
Yes, no, I didn't. Yeah.
I wouldn't admit it if I did. We have amazing people.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can imagine, I was just talking to one of the Israeli delegates here. This is the biggest show in Africa, and it's the people we have that actually makes that happen. And being part of this, I'm so proud to actually have a world-class event with world-class companies exhibiting here. It's just amazing, and it's the people, the South African people, that makes that work.
And all of those companies, in one way or another, are feeding into the image of agriculture in South Africa. So, Chris, let me come to you. Why are the three of you sitting here? There wouldn't be an issue, there wouldn't be a problem unless the industry collectively thought that it had a problem with its image. One, is my interpretation of that correct? And if there is a problem, what is it?
I think if you look at agriculture and you look at the recent reports and even the last couple of years, you know, the question that you ask yourself is, what's in the media, what is spoken about? And it's mostly about transformation, it's mostly about how do we, land ceilings. So it becomes, you actually look far beyond just what the producer does, or do. And for the producers are there really to produce food and to make sure that all of us have something to eat. And I think that is lost in translation if you look at what is coming from media, what is coming from politicians over the last couple of years.
What are you saying? Are we focusing on the wrong story?
I think it's part of the problem. I think we're focusing on areas that is not necessarily creating an image of the brand. Any company who wants to invest further into a brand would like to understand that it's a solid brand, would like to understand that brand can go into other markets, and that brand is not necessarily at the moment
But
well
with respect,
marketed.
it's not my job to tell your good story.
No, it's not your job. But I think we also need to ensure as companies, when we do tell the story, that we tell the right story, the story of technology, the story of good farmers producing, the story of new farmers coming into the fray. So it's a responsibility of all of us, not just part of us. And it's also, I think all of us is part owners of the brand of agriculture in South Africa.
Francois Strydom, are you getting a bad rap as far as your image is concerned?
No, I don't think so. I think, Jeremy, every sector has, by default, has an image. A second-hand motor dealer. So what is it that you think when I say the name? A lawyer or a doctor? So to my mind, and I think there's a perception.
So I'm
issue.
still thinking of the second-hand auto dealer.
I'll give you
Cheap
some time.
cigar, pork pie hat, bad suit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Point is taken.
Yeah. So yes, I think there's perception and there's facts. So the facts is, if you look at the South African producer, he is the first adopter of technology. That's just a factual issue. He's dynamic. He's pragmatic. If you look at the success story since 1994, the free market came, and you look at the way that the South African farmer has outperformed and has strengthened his and her relative competitiveness in the world. I mean, those are the facts. Yes, we can talk about the image, and we should. And I would agree with Chris. The image and the responsibility, we're all South Africans. We're one nation. So,
Omri,
it's all of ours.
Does the difficult image then that you deal with make it more difficult for agri-business and farmers and everyone, all the stakeholders in this industry, to do a better job?
We actually did a perception survey recently, and surprisingly, there's a very positive perception of farmers in South Africa and internationally. I mean, those oaks think we run on steroids here in South Africa compared to the rest of Africa. So you know, I wouldn't slant our image as being bad. I think there's certain, you know, perhaps takes on the image that's. But by and large, I mean, I attended the World Farmers Congress 2 weeks ago. By and large, people view us as very progressive on the continent. And
progressive in what respect? I mean, what are farmers doing here that other farmers are not or could learn from?
Well, we adapt technology. We have big farms, you know. We have economies of scale here. We've got very, very sophisticated value chains. And all the guys that come here to the show, for example, see that, and they're astounded by what we've achieved here.
Big farms, certainly, but often that is seen as something which is casts you in a negative light, that it's big, organized agribusiness against smaller farmers, transformative farmers who are unable to get their foot in the door. That's an image that your industry suffers from. Am I correct?
You're correct, Jeremy, but it's also something that we need to embrace. I think the big farmers today, a lot of them were also small 90 years ago, and it's going over generations and generations. So I think South Africa also, when you look at the industry, we need to look at how we take this industry forward. Sometimes we get bogged down in terms of history and where we are currently, but it's also how do we generate...
But you can't get bogged down in history. History is part of your reality.
It's part of your reality, but you want to progress. You want to ensure that when you progress, that you bring land back into operations, that you make sure that land that's in operation produce the highest yield that's there. So the embracing technology is part of them, but also making sure that there's a new generation of farmers coming through. So it's not necessarily negative.
But Chris, with respect, the criticism is that new generation of farmers is not coming through quick enough, and that's one of the things that gives you the negative image. You, as a collective industry, perhaps are not working hard enough in that respect, or are you?
Look, I think everybody is doing a lot that they can do in terms of their own capacity to generate and to support new farmers. It's not necessarily...
But they also have a job of having to produce food at the same time.
It's not just going out there and put out CVs for anybody who wants to farm. You need to find the farmer who has a passion for farming. If you look at the good farmers today, they all have a passion for what they're doing. And it's finding those individuals with the passion for farming and then supporting those individuals in terms of development that will create the next generation of farmers, and also helping the current farmers, finding the balance between the current farmers and the new generation.
How do you do that? How do you find the balance?
You need to support both of them. You need to support. You can't withdraw from what you have, because food security ultimately is still the aim of farmers in South Africa. That's the principle. So you need to ensure that when you do that, that you still support and help the current commercial farmer to continue to grow. You can't put a limit on his growth either. So you need to bring more farmers into the fray, not just in South Africa, but in Africa.
The challenge, though, Francois, is to accelerate the process, though. The more you accelerate it, the more parity that is achieved in that respect, the better image your brand is going to have?
Look, it's
surely?
all about the balance. Remember the image.
Will you concede the balance is not great at the moment?
So an image is a dynamic concept. It might vary across time
good
frames.
answer.
So I think at the moment, yes, we'll work on that, but there has to be a balance. What would we have said if this year we didn't have enough food on the table? You know, what would the image of agriculture would have been then? So there's a balance between food security and, you know, the dynamic of bringing in new farmers. We have to do one, but also not neglect to do the others. But it has to be balanced. That's the farmer's first priority, is put affordable food, safe food on the table. As a country, that's the responsibility.
Question again I will put to you, and Omri, let's talk about accelerating the balance if we can, in order to appease. And we'll get to often the perceived us and them mentality that exists between agriculture in South Africa and the principal policy maker, which is government. But just in terms of accelerating or achieving that optimum balance, how do you do that? What would necessitate short-term wins in that respect?
Jeremy, we advocate private sector involvement very strongly because that would accelerate anything 4 or 5 times.
What does that mean in what respect?
It means public-private partnerships with government. It means setting up development funding that we can actually take forward. We've got 34,000 commercial farmers in South Africa, you know, with very, very good value chains. Let's use that, you know.
And they're open to that.
They are open to that. And if you give them the commercial incentive to take that forward, land reform and all these factors will escalate with a commercial viability aspect that I don't think it has in the past.
Chris, what about you? Just in terms of achieving more parity, what would you see as a couple of short-term wins in that respect? So public-private partnerships is one aspect of it. Where else can you take this debate?
I think, you know, if you look at the current environment, you have companies like ourselves that really has the infrastructure. So having that partnership and trying to get into the detail, into the different areas, into the communities, making sure that you find those passionate farmers, that's important. There's one thing to say you need to accelerate it. The problem is by just giving somebody land is not necessarily going to give them the ability to farm or the passion to farm. So making sure that you get into the detail areas and using companies with the infrastructure in those areas to actually support and grow the farmers together with government. That's the only way that we can really find that strong balance.
Francois, do you see up over there? Do you know what that is over there? That's the elephant in the room. Okay, I'm going to put the elephant question to you. Why do I have 3 white guys sitting up here?
You're organized.
Okay.
Yeah, we represent.
I mean, do I have a point?
Yeah, you do. We have us as organized agriculture, commercial organized agriculture. That's just the fact. It is predominantly white. So, Chris's point, you know, you have to take in the history. That's where it started. But I'd like to change that to, you know, what do we use and how do we use, what mediums do we use to change that image? Because I think that we have agreed on. It's a dynamic thing. It's a question of balance. How do we change it? I mean, this week.
So there's a general acceptance that you need to change. There's an acceptance that you need to accelerate change. Now let's move on then, as you rightly say, to the applied methodology. How would you like to see that change? Through what mechanism?
That's life. Life is a constant change. Yeah. That's the truth in any sector. So let's just take the mediums that we use. Let's just talk about this platform that we've used now for the 4th day. I mean, the traditional way of changing your image, and I'm certain you'll touch on it on the second part as well when you talk to the experts, that's completely changed. If I look at the social media hits that we've had in this 4 days, it's just shot up through the roof. I mean, tweets we've had in excess of 20,000 tweets. Now, 4 years ago, we wouldn't have seen that. So that's dynamic.
Was Twitter around? It was on, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So we have to be dynamic in that process. There's lots of good stories, but you have to present that in a different way.
Okay. Omri, pick it up.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, we've implemented social media and other platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, And it's working extremely well because we're talking to another generation of people here. We're talking to the future generations of people.
You're seeding the debate, though. Are you changing the debate?
Yes,
You know, you
we
can
are.
have as many Twitter followers as you want. You can put as many messages out there as you want. The reality is often goes over people's heads. By seeding those conversations, are you able to realize quantifiable change? I don't think so yet.
Because what we are telling is we're telling the success stories. We've got entrepreneurship development programs that's geared towards emerging farmers. We've got transformation projects, all kinds of stuff. So we're telling the success stories from the people that have actually achieved the success. And there's no point in just sitting around a table talking about it. We need to show the evidence, the empirical evidence of success. And that's the stories that we're starting to tell.
Chris?
Yeah, I think, Jeremy, if you look at actual change, I mean, first of all, the question that you should ask is, if you look at the image, what do you want to change? If it's just changing, white farmers to black farmers, there's so many training programs. AFGRI ourselves, we have 2 training programs. One that we call ABA, which is really looking at, upgrading and upskilling the community and the farmers in a specific community so that you can see that coming through. Across Africa, we have 5 of those programs already. We have 2 training farms. We train new farmers. And similarly, all the other agricultural companies have similar programs. But I think the image of agriculture is much broader than just changing the color of agriculture. It's also about how do we market our brand of agriculture in South Africa to competitive market out there. South African farmers also compete internationally. So how do we market that brand internationally? So it's for me, yes, transformation is one part of the image,
now,
and that we need to train. And that obviously we need to change. But I think many companies like ours are doing a lot to change that. Do we accelerate it quick enough? Obviously, much more can be done. But within a company with your own capital, you can only do so much in terms of what you have.
Is there actually a consolidated South African agricultural brand per se, or do you need to actually start working on that? You talk about taking the brand and selling it in competitive markets and pushing it more aggressively in the domestic market. But the brand agriculture, does it actually exist?
I think it exists. Whether everybody market it well is probably
and you might all have
another
different
question.
views on it as
And you
well.
may have different views on it. AFGRI, we own our brand, so we can market it. We can portray
That's
a specific
your brand.
question.
That's
our
holistic
brand.
agriculture brand for
So
South
in a sense, if you look at the South African agricultural brand, you could probably ask who's the responsible party to market that brand. And I think all the stakeholders are part of that, but also government is a big role player in that. So the brand exists. I think that brand needs to be portrayed much better, marketed much better. But this is definitely something that we need to
We're going to get to
accelerate.
government in a while because they're
Sure.
a major stakeholder in all of this. But the same question to you, Francois. What is the brand? It seems very amorphous to me.
So by default, it exists.
Yeah.
And I think the point that we're making is it has to be a more proactive and a dynamic process. And if you really look at the structures, who's the custodian of the primary producer? It is organizations like Agri South Africa, Grain South Africa, that joint collective. There's an initiative from...
But do they have a common vision, though?
I think they do. They're developing it dynamically. There's an organization like ASUF who try and pull all the different farmer organizations together. And they're in the process of consolidating that image. So yes, but agree that as far as image is concerned, which is the topic of the day, it has to be managed more proactively.
So you need a more consolidated effort in that respect, Omri. So it's stakeholders like you coming around a table and perhaps in the beginning defining exactly what the brand should look like, what the pillars of the brand should be, all of those attributes of brand building, which I'll get to in part 2 of our discussion. But maybe seed the, and that seems to be my favorite phrase today, seed, but then I am on an agricultural show today. If you were to look at what brand or what the agricultural brand in South Africa should be, so sort of future fit it if you can, ideally what would those pillars entail? And then we'll get our experts to build on that and perhaps come up with some sort of blueprint.
Jeremy,
Experts, I hope you're taking notes here. Okay.
Our philosophy is if the tide rises, in other words, if the agri economy is growing, the small boats will get lifted up as well. So from our side, we have a concerted strategic effort to actually position ourselves in Africa and globally as a major player in the agri industry.
What does that mean, though? What does a major player mean?
It means that we have the most sophisticated agriculture industry in sub-Saharan Africa, and we can use that to very effective terms. And the positioning of ourselves in that respect, and Chris and Francois knows this, is very important, because that means that we'll get alignment on more policy certainty, foreign investment coming into the sector, growing the sector further, and creating inward investments in the sector as well.
Chris, how would you, in your mind, how do you define this overall overarching brand that would then feed into the image?
I think
What's in your head?
I think if you look at the current farmer base, whether small or big, everybody strives to be progressive, to look at new technology. So there's no reason why we can't position the brand of agriculture in South Africa as a very progressive, technology-driven brand with good farmers that knows how to farm and that can really support the food security drive in Africa. There's no reason why we can't do that.
Francois, I would assume that food security is one of those critical pillars that guarantee that you achieve success, and that's what you build the brand on.
To me, that's the point, to bridge the gap between what the facts are and what the perceived image is. So the facts are, for the last 50 years, the South African farmer could produce safe, affordable, and enough food. That's just the facts. Even in this year of drought, our food systems are operative, they work. There's no shortage of food. Yes, there might be a price rise, but there's no shortage of food. So those are just the facts. What we're talking about is the image that concur with
it, but I
that.
don't think you've told that story to people.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah. I think, that's why 4 years back, with this exact platform, that's what we said to each other. Why spread the story to each other? Build it out. I mean, we had a panel yesterday, the day before, Mpumelelo Makabela, former editor of the Sowetan, and Prince Mashile, 3 black panelists. And they were saying the things that, listening to them, I mean, that was the story. They were saying exactly the same things. But the mere fact that they were saying it made a totally different impression. 4 years back, you wouldn't have thought that would have happened at Nampo. So to me, that good story is already spreading, and it's
starting to filter out.
Yeah.
Omri, the policy certainty or policy uncertainty debate that you raised, it seems to be a moving target all the time. I mean, the target itself is a moving target. 1 minute there's one policy, then that changes, then that changes. It creates a lot of confusion, a lot more, too many spokes in your wheel. How do you navigate through that and at the same time try to create a consolidated brand image?
So we did a survey recently, and we found that 65% of farmers still reinvest in their own farms. So amidst the policy uncertainty, there's still an optimism in the South African farming community about agriculture. We engage with government on these matters continuously, and we feel that it's very important to create that policy certainty. If you look at land ceilings or the 50-50 concepts and so on, these things are not always financially viable or constitutional. So you have to be really, really practical when you look at the solutions for agri transformation.
But the sense one gets sometimes that it's overly prescriptive as far as your sector is concerned, and that creates confusion for you.
Yeah, I think it's the principle of custodianship, whereas a free market where people can trade and sell their farms and grow. Because I mean, the other story as well is growth. I mean, you need to grow your business. Farm is a business. You need to grow your business, and economies of scale is the language of the world. And if you can't do that, then you're doomed as an industry. So, like I said, you have to be really practical about these things.
Chris Venter, is there sometimes a sense that there's too much us being you and them being the government, and that chasm is increasingly difficult to cross?
I think you can say that. If you look again just over the past year in terms of some of the communication, in terms of the way that government has, has communicated, ceilings, change in ceilings, you can perceive that. There are a lot of discussions, there are a lot of interaction. between private sector and government. So it's not necessarily always that it's negative. It's just that the perception is created out there that production and farming is very much just about ownership of land. And it's much, much more than that. And I think that communication, as Francois referred to earlier, is not always coming through in a positive manner. And as a result of that, we see the hard work of the farmers. We see what needs to be done to provide food and to make sure that food security is there. And as a result of that, your focus is probably, and your agenda is probably a little bit different to just purely, where government's focus is. And I think all of that needs to be ensure that we have an aligned focus on transformation and on food security.
The us and them debate, is that a reality, or are you dealing with that?
Jeremy, land is an emotive issue.
Yeah.
So
as it should be.
You can just see in the way that the political parties are setting themselves up. Those are one of the issues that's top of your mind. So you can expect that the focus would be on it. We're just making the point all the time that land ownership and the fact that food security, I think that causes that skewing of the image. And that's really what we're working on, to try and keep that balance. That's the reality. Land ownership isn't equal to food security. You have to have somebody that you enable and has the means and the skills to produce on the land.
Fair enough. Okay, let's wrap this up because I want to bring our next panel on. Very quickly then, next 6 months or so, how would you like to see the image of agriculture change?
Yeah, to me, the next 6 months, Jeremy, we've got to almost sit in our hands as far as this. It'll be
ride out the election.
It'll be a hectic time, and nothing is realistic now. So don't make certain assumptions based on what you see on a daily basis in the newspaper. Don't take that as a permanent issue. Let's get through it, and we'll normalize. The facts are there, and those will prevail in the end.
Yeah, I think that the next 12 months, definitely we need to communicate much more. I think the point is taken. It's always important to make sure that we communicate the good successes that we have. It's important to continue to engage. It's important to see where we can engage with government, what ideas we can put forward. The low-hanging fruits are the ones that we need to work on. Focus on making sure food security and support for farmers is there this year.
Omri, I'll give you the final word.
All right, I think we need to get through the drought. We're in the winter months now, and we need to make sure that we secure in the next planting season.
And there are good signs, I understand, in that respect.
Yes, there
in
are
terms
good
of
signs.
where this is heading.
That's right. Weather patterns and so on are changing. I think with regards to the election, it's going to be a bit topsy-turvy, but we have a constitution that will protect us, and that we should refer to. And then we would like to see some funding mechanisms, coming to the fray where we can actually use that to leverage and fast-track rural development.
Gentlemen, thank you for your forthrightness, your openness, and your honesty. I hope that you've done something to further this debate. Nothing is won overnight. I think you've raised some important issues. I think you've been very open and honest about it. And thank you very much indeed. We're going to continue in the next couple of minutes. We're going to look at the different side of it now. We've given you the context, the challenges that this very important industry in South Africa is facing. So how now do you take all of that and turn that into a viable and sustainable and lively brand? And we have 3 brand experts standing by, and we'll get to them in just a moment. Nation in Conversation, and welcome back to part 2 of our discussion as we look now at building the image of agriculture and recalibrating, perhaps reformatting the Agri brand such as it exists. In the first part of the discussion, we learnt about the challenges that exist, and there are myriad challenges, so we know exactly what we've got to work with in that respect. So let me introduce you to my next 3 panel members. To my far left, Phumi Mashigo, founding partner at the agency Ignitive. Phumi, a very warm welcome to you. Rob van Rooyen, sitting next to you, Executive Director Strategy at the advertising agency House of Brave, and one of the best-known voices in advertising and branding in South Africa, Andy Rice. To all of you, a very warm welcome. Andy, let me start with you. You were in the audience listening to the conversation, the different challenges that this particular sector has. Do you think brand agriculture in South Africa is in trouble?
Well, I think there's an interesting irony in the fact that the origin of the word brand comes from agricultural roots, because it was how you identified your livestock.
Full circle.
Exactly.
Yes, okay.
And the irony is that I don't think that agriculture in South Africa has a brand in the commercial sense. Brands are fabulous commercial assets, as any company in most sectors will confirm. I don't think that agriculture, from my perspective as a lay observer, has a consistent, widely understood brand. We heard in the first part how overseas visitors to this extraordinary exhibition have a very different view of what South African agriculture is capable of than our own players within it. So I think there's a...
They're superstars, you know,
Yeah.
they're early technology adopters, you know, guaranteeing food security, yet the
You wouldn't
overall
get that if
perception
you did
is
a
that-
research study locally.
But isn't that just a South African thing generally? It applies to lots of other sectors.
No, I don't think so. I think that brands have understood they have to be authentic, they have to talk the truth. And if the truth is different to perceptions, then it's the marketer's job to close that gap.
So, Phumi, to you then, does such a thing as an agricultural brand actually exist in this country? What I'm hearing from Andy is it doesn't. Maybe that's the starting point.
I agree with Andy. And a lot of what we heard in the first half of the conversation really was a lot about talking about image. But the real essence of any brand, any image, is the character thereof. And I think the one thing in South Africa is that the character of agriculture is flawed. The elephant in the room, as you say. And the one thing that everybody agrees about is there's a need for transformation. The government is playing against us. And everybody hates the fact that Julius is out there saying that we must redress the land issue. There's a lady in the audience that asked an incredibly fascinating question about the fact that there is time, there is investment that needs to be done for farmers to be viable. And in South Africa, when we're fighting within each other, the character is wrong. If you don't fix the foundation of any house, no amount of painting will help it.
It was a very good question, but I will also counter that by saying that one has also got to understand the short-termism, the frustration, because there has been a lack of progress for such a long time. I know we're straying away from brand for just a moment, but I think that's an important caveat to that question.
It is incredibly important. And the reality of it is that no amount of painting over a flawed character. We talk about media and how media is reporting on agriculture. But the reality is that all that media does is it shines a light, and if the character is flawed, then no amount of light shining from wherever you look at it is going to help the brand of agriculture in South Africa.
So we cannot, what you're saying, unless I'm misunderstanding you, is you cannot build a brand until you fix the problems. The problems are many to fix. So therefore, should we all just go?
Start fixing the problems. Don't skirt around the problems. Start fixing the problems. And don't fight with each other about those problems.
But surely as you're fixing the problems, you should be looking at those problems and they should be informing how you're going to build the brand.
If you're trying to tell a good story where there is a big problem, no amount of telling a good story is going to convince people to buy into the authenticity of that brand.
Rob van Rooyen, do you agree?
I do, but I think that there's two parts to this conversation. One is ownership. Who owns the conversation? I think that what happens is that we need to change the conversation. I think Chris pointed out that we have a lot of good news. There actually is a lot of good news about this brand. Unfortunately, because no one has ownership of this conversation, the only things we hear about are the bad things. And there is an agenda, and I always say the worst place to start a brand is with a political agenda. And you can't solve a political agenda with a brand either. And I think that what we need to rather do is understand what our conversation is going to be, because the conversation that we have on the outside and the conversation that we have on the inside are very, very different. And I have to say, a lot of the good news is invisible. There is a lot of good stuff. And actually, when you spend some time doing your research, just digging deeper, you actually discover how rich our good stories are. But they are overweighed completely by the political agenda that is actually... and so the stakeholders that actually have ownership of this brand, number one, don't like each other. That's the truth. And number two, aren't playing well together.
So how do you get them in the same playpen, first of all, to become buddies?
I think it is about conversation. I think it is about ownership. I think it is... The solution does lie in, unfortunately, time and investment. I think that it was pointed out that government is hindering some of this stuff, but they're also opening the doors and have a willingness to make sure that the conversation that they are putting out there, that they are working towards the right thing. And that is about mobilization, it is about transformation, but more importantly, it is also about productivity and the message we have out there. Because when we're in international markets, I can tell you right now, all you have to do is walk around and you will be exposed to how people perceive the goods that we produce out of this wonderful sector in our country.
Andy Rice, notwithstanding the excellent point that Phumi makes about you can't really start working on the brand until you fix the problems that the brand is going to inform. I accept that. But let's, for the sake of this particular discussion, take them at their word that they are aware of the problems, that they are starting to fix the problems. It's their problems. It's not our issue. It's their issue. So they have to start fixing them. But once that is happening, where then do you start building an overall or uniform Agri brand to serve those good stories that Rob van Rooyen is talking about?
Well, I think one of the starting problems is that we're not quite sure what the problems are. I think that if you ask 10 different stakeholders in influential positions and another 10 at the whatever the agricultural equivalent to the coal
in fairness,
faces.
it's the us and them, it's the policy uncertainty, it's obviously the transformation issue. Those are the three. Those seem to me to be the three big issues. I'm sure there are lots of
others. If you're right and those are the three, we still don't have a quantification. We don't have enough understanding, diagnostic ability of the problems to put a strategy together. I have a very naive and simple view about strategy, which says that whether it's in business or in sport or in warfare, you have point A and point B, and strategy is to try and get you from point A to point B. A is where are we now? B, as you were asking the previous panelists, where would you like them to be? And you can't guess at point A, because otherwise you all are effectively starting from different points. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there is an often used quotation, but it's very true. So I asked the question, although there were references made to surveys conducted, quote, I think that what is required for such a massively important sector of the economy is some kind of substantial, quantitative, definitive study of the current landscape, so that we can say we know what the problems are and we know relatively how big they are and where they exist and where they don't.
So having an inkling of what the problems are, as was alluded to in the previous panel, isn't good enough.
Well, I think it's subjective and qualitative rather than objective and quantitative. And that's what we want. We want to say, we all agree, here's where we are. Now let's debate where we want to be and a strategy to get us there.
Phumi, you would agree with that?
I'd like to offer a place to start, because I agree with, you've got to have a destination. You've got to know where you want to go to and where you're coming from. And I think the one thing that can unite all the stakeholders in the agribusiness is feeding the nation. I think the government is interested in making sure that there's food security for everybody. The farmers are interested in making sure that their product gets off the land. So that is the starting point where they can start and say, if we are about feeding the nation, then you stop.
And that's the pillar. That's the payoff line, the pillar. It underpins everything.
Then you stop fighting about who is doing what when. Because if you're always asking yourselves, is starting a court action, for instance, against a very big stakeholder in your industry, is it going to help you feed the nation? No, because then they're going to shut down the taps. When you talk about financing and funding, when you talk about training, when you talk about attracting young farmers, when you're talking about attracting passionate farmers, you can't shrink your way to greatness. You've got to think about something bigger than what you are about right now, and feeding the nation is what it is.
So, Rob van Rooyen, it's firstly about uniting around a common vision once the quantitative study has been done. Is that how you do it?
I think absolutely. Yeah. I think that Andy is 100% right. You start with the data, and then you're absolutely right in terms of it's moving towards a common goal. There's a lot of moving components of this, but I think that we've just got to be cognizant that we're trying to solve a lot of physical problems. That's not necessarily brand issues. I think one of the interesting issues is how do we bring young people and the passion back into it? I have a lot of hope when we talk about weekend farmers and part-time farmers, because there's a passion that is instilled in these things. And
You're just jealous. You want to be a weekend farmer.
I want to be a weekend anything. Do you have a weekend? That's shocking. I don't know what those are anymore. But I think that the idea of being able to instill that ideal or that lifestyle of what does it mean to be a farmer and what does it mean to be a South African farmer is such an important one. If you look at the Americas, per se, there's a pride that is associated with being...
But there's also an image, isn't there? There's a visceral, tangible personification of that farmer. I don't think we have that here.
No, and I think that allows people, when you have that, it allows private sector to invest more in. We spoke a lot about that. Almost 14 years ago, I worked on John Deere in South Africa, and we came up with a line, I think it was working, your toekomst is groen. Translation, your future is green.
Thanks, they really needed that.
Yeah,
in this audience.
with Van Rooyen, and I can't speak Afrikaans, so someone had to explain it to me. But it was a really important line that it was about this aspiration of what we as a farming community and as farmers and agri can really offer the rest of the world. And I think that what we've got to not be dragged down by is some of these other issues that are very real issues, and we need to talk about them, from transformation to micro to macro. But at the same time, we have to build a brand that is exciting, that brings passion into this, that brings people into the sector, and then more importantly, gives us something we can sell. This is not just about feeding a nation, I think. It's about also having a global position that allows us to go, this comes and is South African, and it does mean something more.
But before we get to what might inform that qualitative research, Andy, and the kind of questions you as a strategist might ask in that respect, Rob, the feeding the nation positioning, it's useful, it's neutral, it's powerful, it's important. Is that a good destination to take Andy's research to?
I think absolutely. Number one, I'm really upset that I didn't come up with it, because you must get paid for this stuff. But it is an important one that I think there has to be something that brings all the conversation to one start point and then allows us to layer the deeper conversation.
Yeah.
But all great brands start with a single idea that almost creates the start point to create the destination.
But Andy Rice, you might say that you can't arrive at that positioning until you've done the research. I mean, the research might tell you something completely different. Maybe it's not about feeding the nation. So what would inform your quantitative strategic analysis before you can reach that point?
Well, I think Phumi touched on something that's really important, which was the concept of collaboration. I think we have a proud history of successful collaboration as a means of defusing deep problems in South Africa. So, CODESA would be the first such example, and there have been many more. And I'm involved right now in a project to tackle problems in a sector which is probably one of the few that creates as much heat as agriculture does. That's education. And it's a project called the National Education Collaboration Trust. And it's an attempt to bring all stakeholders into being fully involved in trying to find a resolution to the educational problems that we face. And I think the same thing applies in agriculture, that we need to understand that our ability to go forward is determined by the weakest party going forward, or the most mischievous party going forward, or whatever. If we don't get total collaboration, if we can't find that common ambition, that common output that everybody who are currently in an adversarial situation can become partners, then I think that we're not going to make the progress, and in 2 years' time you'll be back here asking the same questions.
No sacred cows, again, an agricultural analogy. I'm trying seeding, all of that. I'm trying my best. But did you get a sense from the previous panel that there was at least a willingness, Andy, to engage in that dynamic of collaboration? Or did you get a sense from what they were saying that they are, that they're still very, here comes another one, siloed? Okay.
Well, that's exactly the word. I think there was a sectoral gap between them, and I think that it would be important to try and bridge that. And it takes me into a space which is commonly known as brand citizenship, which is where commercial brands have a responsibility not just to be competitive in their sector, but to be contributors to the society they trade within. So they must leave a legacy, not just in the bank balance, but in the communities they serve. And I think that agribusiness needs to do more of that, because I think that quite rightly, the John Deeres of this world and every other company represented here have a commercial imperative, and so it should be, because they have to survive. But I think increasingly they ought to understand that they can make a difference in a wider community than the people who might buy their merchandise. And I'm sure many of them are doing that already, but if that became the norm rather than the exception, then I think we would be, again, going a long way to breaking down those barriers and allowing collaboration of all stakeholders to be a reality.
So, Phumi, if you were given the job of starting that brand audit, looking at the perceptual problems, where the starting point would be, and you were engaging with this constituency, what would the key questions be that you would be asking of them in order to reach the starting position so you can start building the brand?
So the first thing when I walk into any room is look around and see the representation in the room. And when you walk around here and you look at the people that are in the room, and we only have one part-time farmer who's black, is we're shrinking our way to greatness. Because it is impossible to think that we're going to grow the sector without becoming more diversified. So what I would look at is I would say, how do we get more diversified here? Where do we find the new passionate farmers? How do we attract them into this environment? Because if we're only talking to, and I think Chris from AFGRI spoke about the fact that for a long time they couldn't even attract the white young people back into the industry. You've got a problem in a country where we're predominantly young, where we're predominantly black and predominantly
and with so much
female.
agricultural potential. Yeah.
And female.
Yeah.
If we're not involving those people in that discussion and only speaking to these constituents, we're not going to get the answers we require to move forward.
I'm just looking at Farmers Weekly in front of me here. There is a farm for sale in this area. I can take you to have a look at it a bit later on if you want.
Will you and I buy it together?
We could do that, okay. Rob, where would you start with your brand audit here? What key questions? So diversification, no-brainer. That, you know, what are you doing and how are you going to get there?
Yeah.
Part two, what else would you be asking?
Well, Jeremy, I think it's about asking maybe different questions. I absolutely recognize there is a transformation issue, but I think also stated this is not about changing the color of farming. This is about creating a healthy sector, a healthy brand, something that means
Informing
something.
that is also changing the color, surely.
Absolutely, and I think it's a fundamental pillar to it. However, it's not the story, and it's not the brand story. And I think that what we are is incredibly hard on ourselves in terms of there are things that we need to do in time and with the right thing to ensure that we are on the right platforms. But I think it is also moving towards what do we want that thing to be for the young black female South African. She's not going to join farming because there's transformation. So what is the aspiration, the idea that we're selling? And I think that one of the big things that I really, really liked, and it was many years ago and I came across it in a document that was for Ford tractors, and it was an international document. And they said they would succeed as a company when they had more college graduates joining farming because it was a successful business than if it was a farming itself. And I think that that's the transformation that's happening, is that farming is not farming, it's a business. And I think there's some exciting parts that are certainly open to young people in terms of understanding what that lifestyle is and what they can be given. I mean, we have kind of a transformation happening in people's mindsets in terms of what it is. People, and farming used to be about the idea that you work in the dirt, you are dirt, and you die in the dirt. And I don't think that that's farming anymore. I think that's farming.
Channeling John Steinbeck, yes.
Yeah, it's farming is a way of life, and I think that young people are more open to those ideas now, where in the old days, if you were successful, you had to be a doctor, a lawyer. Yeah. And farming was probably very low on the rung. You would almost try and escape farming. I think that we need to ensure that there is that aspiration around what does farming offer young people to make it exciting again.
So, Andy Rice, pick it up then. If that's, Phumi, I'll come to you now, but just let me finish this one quickly. How do you start that process in creating an aspirational dynamic to this? Because you will build a brand if you have the right people participating in the brand. So to Rob's point, bringing those younger, dynamic, more exciting, different people with different ideas into the sector. Is there a,
well, even though
is there a place to start?
Even though there's a completely understandable and rightful impatience with the rate of change, the reality is that the way to affect that image change in the long term is to start as young as possible. So I read somewhere an observation that school in South Africa, for many school-going kids, is seen as a way out of going into farming rather than a way in. So it's the default negative option. My parents were farmers, or were subsistence farmers, whatever it may be. It's not aspirational. I don't want to go in there. Therefore, I can use school to get myself into those other professions.
Get the hell out of there as quickly as possible.
Now, I went to school and university in the UK, and at a tertiary education level, agriculture as an option had as much respect and gravitas and desire as conventional universities, and agricultural colleges were good places to go. I sense that has been lost to some extent in South Africa. There used to be a thriving agricultural college community. I'm not sure, I don't have the facts, but I sense that it is not as strong as it used to be. And the options to make farming cool for the younger generation are not enough there at the moment.
So how would you start making farming cool?
Well, I think you target in your brand communications. One of the target markets you will look at is.
It's a nice job to have and an important job to have.
Yeah, we've seen transformation from one profession to another as the preferred one.
Yeah.
We were talking about the US earlier, and Rob alluded to that. There is a sense qualitatively that American farmers are what built the nation.
Yeah.
The Midwest is the heart and soul of America, and everybody feels they've got a bit of farming in them, even if they live in a flat in New York. And I saw a Gallup poll that confirmed that to some extent. That it was a study asking the question about respect for different professions and how much respect you have for the following professions. And agriculture, farming, was third on a list of about 40 professions, after only IT and, strangely enough, the restaurant business. Farming in many countries has that level of admiration and respect that we have to create here, and we have to start young.
At the bottom of the list, apparently, it's advertising and
Did I see that
strategists, then
coming?
journalists, which is why we're sitting here after all. Phumi, you wanted to jump in.
I did, and I think, respectfully for Rob, I think the thing about the image of farming is you must know that in South Africa, for a large part of our population, we're speaking in English now, and the word is farming. But actually, for a lot of people, farmer is equal to ibunu in Zulu, right? Which is the poor, and which has a very negative connotation for a lot of South Africans. So those young people that you're trying to tell them that it's cool, they must then say to their parents, what I want to be when I grow up is ibunu. Never.
No, it's not going to happen.
You're never going to
So
get
how do you
that.
overcome the historical baggage then?
And again, it is about character.
Yeah.
I think the most important part of it is that the character of the industry that we are talking about is refusing to change. And this is human nature. Human nature wants to be comfortable, wants to be happy in the space that it is in. And so you have an entire industry that on one side is fighting every part of the changing for the better, in my view. And what that means is that it is, again, shrinking. As it is currently food secure for the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, it will not be in another 20 years, because the guys that are the current farmers will not be able to pass those skills on to the next generation, because they will not have them to pass the skills to. And you're not going to be able to say to a kid like me from the township, actually it's cool to be living on a farm, or it's, we've got to make sure that the character, when you're talking about land, when you're talking about the viability of the economy, now you're starting to talk about things that are saying, oh, okay, this is something that I might want to get into. When you talk about how rich you can become in farming, when you talk about ZZ2 and what they've been able to do, that is a story that now can resonate, but it is about character. When you talk about ZZ2, you're talking about two Afrikaans guys and you're like trying to tell like funky young me from Soweto that this is the thing you want to do. It's not going to happen. So it's important that that character and the foundation of what you are selling is something that is a much bigger goal, which resonates with people.
Andy, what I'm hearing from Phumi is quite sad, actually, because I'm sensing that we hear and we want to talk about agriculture as a brand, but we're still battling with image before we can even get to the brand. How far off are we from this particular debate? I mean, I was asking our previous panel for what's going to constitute a 6 to 18-month win. What I'm hearing here, that ain't going to happen, is it? I mean, that's way down the line.
I think we have two issues that are of particular concern or particular importance. And the first is this conflation of political issues with commercial issues. And I think that's something that goes beyond the brand and is something that has to be tackled.
Which, in the South African context, I don't think you will ever separate.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So one has to find, therefore, strategies that mitigate that. You won't eliminate it. But the other thing is, I don't think that what we should expect is that every young person in Soweto should want to become a farmer. What we want is respect for the profession. So doctors are only 1% of professional people, perhaps.
But what you're
whatever it
saying is no one in Soweto would want to do it because of the perceived image.
Or even respected
Yeah.
because of the perceived image.
But that's what we have to change, that image. I think that our objective is not to have loads of young black students lined up at agricultural colleges' doors. What we want is some progress towards respect for the profession so that those who do want to actually enter it have fewer barriers.
But why not? Why do we not? And this is my point, is we want all of those young people, we want young people to have options. We want young people to want to be able to come into, we're not 1% of doctors. Never mind what the barriers of becoming a doctor is like. When becoming a farmer requires you to have passion and compassion and requires a completely different set of skills. I'm not just talking about commercial farmers here. I'm talking about subsistence farmers. I'm talking about small-scale farmers, all of that kind of stuff. When you look at how branding and products, a lot of people are into, there's small-scale farmers selling to people like Rob and Woolworths because they're selling organic or they're selling food, food from the area. There are lots of opportunities, and in a country like South Africa...
Don't knock Woolies. It's important, eh, Rob?
Guys, isn't that where milk comes from?
But, and what it is about, and I think that the opportunity for agriculture and the farming industry in South Africa is being more inclusive, is being as big as possible, because you want as big as possible a pool of talented, passionate people getting into it at all times.
But no brand appeals to everyone. What you have to achieve is that everyone understands the brand, understands what it is saying, and then you can say, I get it, but it's not for me. So that's the stage we have to get the agriculture brand to, which is a point where it is on strategy and everybody gets the truth of it, so that some of them can say, wow, I want to join that industry, and others say, I get entirely what they're telling me, and I respect it and I admire
what
it.
they're doing.
Yeah, but it's just not particularly what I want to do.
I think we also suffer from invisibility. This sector, in the consumer's minds or in anybody's mind, is very invisible. I mean, I always say farmers is like bees. If the bees die, we all die.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with farmers. And there's less and less farmers and there's less and less bees. And I think that what we have to do is we have to become visible again. We have to put this conversation, and the only conversation that's happening out there at the moment, transformation, land, and politics.
So what is more important, inclusivity, which is Phumi's point, or visibility, which is your point?
Well, I
Because,
think
I mean, those two also seem to be diametrically opposed in many respects.
I don't think so. I think that they actually are hand in hand. And I think there's been a number of points here made about sensationalism, media, agendas. Those are very easy to get out there. The hard part is to actually get out there is the invitation to engage. I think that there has been some amazing learnings that are coming out here because, unfortunately, even though the sector is very rich, they're very poor in terms of attention or perception in the market because of the media. There's no other conversation out there that's happening in the world. And I think that when you have a successful brand, it allows you to charge a premium price and you have a greater desire to take it up. And I think at the moment, this brand is in trouble. And it's not just because of the problems with the pillars, but it's because it's completely invisible. And the stakeholders that are supposed to be making it visible don't like each other.
Panel members, thank you very much indeed. Audience, thank you to you as well. And that's where we'll leave this last edition this week of the Nation in Conversation. Thank you for watching.
Nation in Conversation is proudly brought to you by AFGRI, NJ, Grain SA, John Deere, Monsanto, Nedbank and Senwes.